This space is for people who are learning how to listen inward and trust themselves again. If that resonates, subscribe and stay a while. Hi everyone, welcome to this first episode of Unpacked Sessions. My name is Shayla and I am so excited to be here with you all. I'm looking forward to making this space a space that invokes thought, allows people to maybe connect with a different perspective, and just listen to, I guess, what I have to say. I don't know. Today's episode is going to highlight a book that I have been wanting to read for a very long time. I actually started it the other night. It is called Ain't I Woman by Bell Hooks. Maybe last year I came familiar with Bell Hooks and her work. I'm not going to say familiar, but I read All About Love, which I think is a great book for if you're just starting out on a journey and curious to pick apart what maybe love means for you. But after I read that book, I was hooked, essentially. Bell Hooks, she's a phenomenal writer. I love how she captured her own version of Blackness. And I started going through some of her literature and seeing what was out there. And Ain't I Woman definitely caught my eye because I do identify as a Black feminist. And I hope to dive deeper into what that means on this episode, maybe later episodes. But as I was reading the first few pages, the introduction, there were some things that stuck out to me that I do want to share with you all. I want to go over some of the historic elements of Are You Black before anything else and what that looks like specifically for Black women. I'm going to be reading this introduction in its fullness, just going over my experience, my thoughts, some of the reflection that I had as I was reading, and just the chapter overall. I'm going to leave some questions in the description. Feel free to answer them in the comments. I'm also probably going to ask them towards the end of this episode, but let's just get right into it. So this is the introduction of Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. At a time in American history when Black women in every area of the country might have joined together to demand social equality for women and a recognition of the impact of sexism on our social status, we were by and large silent. Our silence was not merely a reaction against white women liberationists or a gesture of solidarity with Black male patriarchs. It was the silence of the oppressed, that profound silence engendered by resignation and acceptance of one's lot. Contemporary Black women could not join together to fight for women's rights because we did not see womanhood as an important aspect of our identity. Racist, sexist socialization had conditioned us to devalue our femaleness and to regard race as the only relevant label of identification. In other words, we were asked to deny a part of ourselves, and we did. Consequently, when the women's movement raised the issue of sexist oppression, we argued that sexism was insignificant in light of the harsher, more brutal reality of racism. We were afraid to acknowledge that sexism could be just as oppressive as racism. We clung to the hope that liberation from racial oppression would be all that was necessary for us to be free. We were a new generation of Black women who had been taught to submit, to accept sexual inferiority, and to be silent. Unlike us, Black women in 19th century America were conscious of the fact that true freedom entailed not just liberation from a sexist social order that systematically denied all women full human rights. These Black women participated in both the struggle for racial equality and the women's rights movement. When the question was raised as to whether or not Black female participation in the women's rights movement was a detriment to the struggle for racial equality, they argued that any improvement in the social status of Black women would benefit all Black people. Addressing the World Congress of Representative Women in 1893, Anna Cooper spoke on the status of Black women. The higher fruits of civilization cannot be extemporized. Neither can they be developed normally in the brief space of 30 years. It requires the long and painful growth of generations. Yet all through the darkest period of the colored woman's oppression in this country, her yet unwritten history is full of heroic a struggle against fearful and overwhelming odds that often ended in a horrible death, to maintain and protect that which woman holds dearer than life. The painful, patient, and silent toil of mothers to gain a fee, simple title to the bodies of their daughters, the despairing fight, as of an entrapped tigress, to keep hollowed their own persons, would furnish material for epics. That more went down under the flood than stemmed the current is not extraordinary. So let's pause here because obviously I'm struggling. This is from 1893. So the way this is written, I obviously understand the context and what she's saying, but the way this is written is nowhere near of how we talk today. And this is a quote from Anna Cooper, right? So basically what she's saying is that the fact that more women have suffered than have maintained, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? More women have suffered than maintain the actual status quo, I guess, is not extraordinary. It's a problem, nonetheless. The majority of our women are not heroines. It is not anything to be celebrated that women are martyrs or Black women have been martyrs and Black women have died at the hands of addressing their status as not only being Black but also being female as well, right? So yeah, she goes on to say the majority of our women are not heroines, but I do not know that a majority of any race of women are heroines. It is enough for me to know that while in the eyes of the highest tribunal in America, she was deemed no more than chattel, an irresponsible thing, a dual block, to be drawn hither or thither at the volition of an owner. The Afro-American woman maintained ideals of womanhood unashamed by any ever conceived. Resting or fermenting in untutored minds, such ideals could not claim a hearing at the bar of the nation. The white woman could at least plead for her own emancipation. The Black woman, doubly enslaved, could but suffer and struggle and be silent, right? Because once the fight for racism is over, or we still have the fight of sexism that is very much alive and well. There are tons of books and things that I have read since I've started my journey as a Black feminist. I was not always identifying as a Black feminist. There was a point in time where, hell, I wasn't even a feminist, right? And it wasn't until I started really getting deep into my social work. Oh, by the way, I am a social worker, bachelor's and master's. But it wasn't until I started getting deep into my social work and working with women specifically that I was like, hey, there's actually a space where that intersection between being Black and being female, it actually, white women cannot relate to Black women the way that, and Black men also cannot relate to Black women and that experience and our experience overall, because it is double the work, double the suffering, double the issues, right? And it's been like that. I'm not going to say it'll always be like that, but it has been like that, right? So while white women can understand the pressure and unfairness of being a woman and what that entails, they will never understand what it is like to be Black. And while Black men can deeply understand the racism and the issues that come with racism, and not even, but being 100 steps behind because of the systemic racism that exists within this country and honestly the world. But hey, you feel me? They will never understand what it is like to be a woman, ever. So both exist within the identity of being both Black and a woman. And I think that when white women understand the layers and Black men begin to understand the layers of what it means to be a Black woman, then maybe we'll be able to come to some sort of understanding, right? But this has always existed. This is 1893, right? That's not even including years prior to this, which chapter 1 of this book goes into, but I digress. So, for the first time ever in American history, Black women like Mary Church Terrell, Sojourner Truth, Anna Cooper, Amanda Berry Smith, and others broke through the long years of silence and began to articulate and record their experiences. In particular, they emphasized the female aspect of their being, which caused their lot to be different from that of the Black male. A fact that was made evident when white men supported giving Black men the vote while leaving all women disenfranchised. And that's why I posed the question earlier, are you Black before anything else, right? Because the question also applies to other races. And from what it looks like, I have always stood with the idea that you are Black before you are anything else. But reading this, it made me realize patriarchy is actually so deeply ingrained in our culture and our society that even white men was like, fuck the women. We are going to give Black men the vote before we give white women the vote. And I do deeply believe as well that a lot of Black women have a tendency to have this undying racial loyalty. And I don't blame us for having that because, however, a lot of Black men don't. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of Black men do not have that undying loyalty because when it comes to being a man, they're going to choose the benefits of being a man every time. A lot of times. I'm not even going to say every time because I don't want y'all to get the wrong idea. I'm not a man hater. I'm just speaking facts, right? A lot of times they will choose their maleness over aligning with Black women. And this is historic. And I'm going to keep reading, right? Ooh, goodness gracious. So in particular, they emphasize the female aspect of their being, which caused their lot to be different from that of a Black male. A fact that was made evident when white men supported giving Black men the vote while leaving all women disenfranchised. Horace Greeley and Wendell Phillips called it the Negro's Hour, but in actuality, what was spoken of as Black suffrage was Black male suffrage. And suffrage is the right to vote, in case someone doesn't know, right? By supporting Black male suffrage and denouncing white women's rights advocates, white men revealed the depths of their sexism that was at that brief moment in American history greater than their racism. And this is why I will never understand how white women stand so firmly with white men, because baby, they gonna throw y'all under the bus every time. Historically, whatever. A sexism that was at that brief moment in American history greater than their racism. Prior to white male support of suffrage for Black men, white women activists had believed it would further their cause to ally themselves with Black political activists. But when it seemed Black men might get the vote while they remained disenfranchised, political solidarity with Black people was forgotten, and they urged white men to allow racial solidarity to overshadow their plans to support Black male suffrage, right? So the moment that white women were like, oh shit, we're not going to get our way, they immediately threw Black activists, and a lot of the big Black activists back during this time were Black men, right? So they immediately let that racism jump out. So once again, it's this question of, are you Black before you are anything else? Like I said, even after reading this, I still deeply believe you are Black before anything else. But I digress. As the racism of white women's rights advocates surfaced, let me chill. The fragile bond between themselves and Black activists was broken. Even though Elizabeth Stanton, in her article, Women and Black Men, published in the 1869 issue of The Revolution, attempted to show that the Republican cry for manhood suffrage was aimed at creating antagonism between Black men and all women, the break between the two groups could not be mended. While many Black male political activists sympathized with the cause of women's rights advocates, they were not willing to lose their own chance to gain the vote. So once again, Black men, while they understood that women's rights were important, they still chose their maleness over aligning themselves with all women getting the right to vote. Black women were placed in a double bind. To support women's suffrage would imply that they were allying themselves with white women activists who had publicly revealed their racism. But to support only black male suffrage was to endorse a patriarchal social order that would grant them no political voice. When I read this, it is highlighted. When I read this the other night, I almost wanted to cry because that is what it feels like every single day being a black woman. Do I choose to align myself with my gender, or do I choose to be loyal to my race, right? And both sides would tell you, well, I'm not even going to say both sides, right? Because later on, she starts to describe some things that I've also experienced, right? Of just white women believing that the reason black women are not involved in feminist matters or matters of sexism is because we believe racism is more important, when a lot of times there's just black women, we cannot choose between the two. I am all these things at one time. I am black and a woman at all times. So I cannot choose one that's more important, because both are equally important, because both are equally who I am all the time. I don't get to turn off my blackness, and I don't get to wake up a man. That's simple. The more radical black women activists demanded that black men and all women be given the vote. Period, right? You would think easy enough. Sojourner Truth was the most outspoken black woman on this issue. She argued publicly in favor of women gaining the right to vote and emphasized that without this right, black women would have to submit to the will of black men. Her famous statement, "There is a great stir about colored men getting their rights, but not a word about the colored woman. And if colored men get their rights and not colored women theirs, you see, the colored men will be masters over the women, and it will be just as bad as it was before," reminded the American public that sexist oppression was as real a threat to the freedom of black women as racial oppression. It is always both for black women. It is always both and. So then I developed the question, which I said I was going to put these questions in the description. I still am, right? Because I want the discourse. Are black women a lone soldier? Can anybody else relate to being a black woman outside of black women? No. I deeply, the longer I think about this, and mind you, this is the intro. This is just the intro of this book. But the longer I think about this, the more I'm like, no, nobody understands what it is like to be a black woman at all. So, and a lot of times we are a lone soldier. It's actually crazy. But despite protests from white and black women activists, sexism carried the day and black men received the vote, period. Because men are going to align with the patriarchy because that is what gives them the most privilege in this society, right? I don't think a lot of people understand intersectionality. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw, my girl. But I don't think a lot of people understand intersectionality. You are all things at all times. You don't get to pick up and put down whatever. And some of your identities have more privileges than others, right? It's a will. You have so many different identities that you can fall on. Maybe I'll talk about this in another episode. But men are always going to benefit from being a man because men benefit from the patriarchy, and a lot of the society and cultures that dominate, quote unquote, the world right now are patriarchal. Dominate is a great word because it took dominance and force to get it there. But again, I digress. Although black women and men had struggled equally for liberation during slavery and much of the Reconstruction era, black male political leaders upheld patriarchal values. As black men advanced in all spheres of American life, they encouraged black women to assume a more subservient role. Mind you, Harriet Tubman damn near carried the Underground Railroad on her fucking back. And you want black women to be subservient. There's a reason we all exist. Y'all need us. The subservience could have served a purpose. But I deeply believe that working together outshines all of that. You can get twice as much done with two people with different perspectives, different angles, aiming to understand each other with a common goal, right? It's hard to believe that the subservient role did nothing but enable Black men to get away with patriarchal bullshit. As Black men, I was reading, as Black men advanced in all spheres of American life, they encouraged Black women to assume a more subservient role. Gradually, the radical revolutionary spirit that had characterized the intellectual and political contribution of Black women in the 19th century was quelled. A definite change in the role played by Black women in the political and social affairs of Black people occurred in the 20th century. This change was indicative of an overall decline in the efforts of all American women to effect radical social reform. When the women's rights movement ended in the 20s, the voices of Black women liberationists were stilled. The war had stripped the movement of its earlier fervor, while Black women participated equally with Black men in the struggle for survival by entering the workforce whenever possible. They did not advocate an end to sexism. 20th century Black women had learned to accept sexism as natural, a given, a fact of life. Had surveys been taken among Black women in the 30s and 40s, and had they been asked to name the most oppressive force in their lives, racism and not sexism would have headed the list. When the civil rights movement began in the 50s, Black women and men again joined together to struggle for racial equality. Yet Black female activists did not receive the public acclaim awarded to Black male leaders. We hear about Martin Luther King, we hear about Malcolm X, and don't get me wrong, we do hear about Rosa Parks, for example, right? We do. However, there is Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, just to name a couple women that I was unaware even existed. Nikki Giovanni, unaware that I even, Bell Hooks, that unaware that I even knew existed until higher education, until I was informed in a different way. These were not people that I were learning about in elementary, middle, high school. I don't know. I think purposefully, of course, but precedents. Even Afeni and Asada Shakur. I watched Dear Mama on FX when it came out. I think that was 2023, maybe 2024. She was a dynamic woman. The Black Panthers, I believe they were slightly after, it was all together between the civil rights movement. The Black Panthers was slightly after, but they were all enveloped into one, right? We do not talk about the women who were powerful in the movement enough, right? And I think it's because we're discussing right now, patriarchy took precedence. They didn't receive that public acknowledgement. Sexist role patterning was as much the norm in Black communities as in any other American community. It was an accepted fact among Black people that the leaders who were most revered and respected were men. Black activists defined freedom as gaining the right to participate as full citizens in American culture. They were not rejecting the value system of that culture. Consequently, they did not question the rightness of patriarchy. The 60s movement toward Black liberation marked the first time Black people engaged in a struggle to resist racism, in which clear boundaries were erected, which separated the roles of women and men. Black male activists publicly acknowledged that they expected Black women involved in the movement to conform to a sexist role pattern. They demanded that Black women assume a subservient position. Black women were told that they should take care of the household needs and breed warriors for the revolution. That's crazy. When I read this the other night, I was like, breed warriors for the revolution? It almost made me jump out of my skin. It made me so angry. Tony Cade's article on the issue of roles is one discussion of the sexist attitudes that prevail in Black organizations during the 60s. And I'm going to cut this episode right here, and we will pick up next week. I'm going to keep going because it's already at 30 minutes, and honestly, I could go on and on. But thanks for sitting with me. The one question, well, two questions that I am going to put in the description for you all to interact with. Are you Black before you are anything else? I want to know if, I know I can't be the only person who feels like you are, but I also want to hear perspective. And the next one is, are Black women a lone soldier? Is our experience unlike any other experience? If so, why? Thank y'all for tuning into this episode of Unpacked Sessions. I am so looking forward to the next episode and looking forward to developing and building this space. Bye, y'all.